Welcome, everyone. I want you to welcome one of my most favorite people in the entire world. He has a type of knowledge I've never encountered anybody to ever have, and his information is extremely wise. I even told him one time he's like Vishnu and Metatron had a baby and like had him grow up in Santa Cruz, California. But it's just a disclaimer that once you listen to Andreas Xirtus, it will get you to think differently and see the world differently. And don't say that I didn't warn you. I highly recommend you follow his channel, Xirtus, Xirtus. You will be extremely enlightened. And I hope you could keep up. So please welcome the one and only Andreas Xirtus. Andreas, how are you? Can you explain to everyone, like, and some information about you and a little bit of background? And
Well, yeah. Also, just want to say thanks, and that was awesome. Those were beautiful words to say about me. And then Johnny, also, it's good to meet you, and I hope to hear more about you as well. But yeah, I am Andreas. I do YouTube videos now. I spent a lot of time researching Tartaria, so that's something that we're coming up back into again. It's become more and more important as we watch people like leave the World Economic Forum that have talked about building a new Tartarian empire, and Russia at the fritz right now about what's going to happen with the Atlantic exchange. So all of these historic ideas that originally I got interested in because I wanted to, avoid studying contemporary journalism out of fear of snooping into somebody's business is going to get me in trouble. So I said, all right, I'll look into historical things so that it doesn't really interfere with anybody's business. And then you find Tartaria and you find an entire conspiracy that is completely relevant despite trying to look at something that's supposed to be super far in the past, something that's actually affecting us right now all over the world. And all sorts of crazy different people in the world it's coming out of the woodwork, people in Taiwan, people in Japan, people in Russia, right, all connected to this story, right, people in Alaska and California and people on the East Coast as well, connected to this story of this like lost civilization. So I don't know, that started my research off into the Tartaria sphere.
That's
Johnny's
awesome.
new. Yeah, Johnny's kind of new to the Tartarian world. So
Well,
I was
so
like, what a
so
perfect person to go over that is like Andreas to enlighten Johnny.
yeah, no, I'm sort of new to it, but sort of not because when I was living out in Hungary, we would call it something different. We would make a lot of references to the Vinca or the
Mm-hmm.
Vincha, which I know that the both of you have gone over, and I have a lot of questions for both of you. I'd really like to deep dive and most certainly everything I've heard about you is true, Andreas. I am so impressed since Julia showed me your work and I wanted to ask you guys some questions, and I know that your audience probably knows all about Tartaria, but every time I come to this subject, people talk about a great cover up. And if we look at the Vinca or the Vincha, their alphabet is so ancient, among the most of all the ancient alphabets, with the ancient Hungarian, and we go back into the Sanskrit and everything. But these buildings we see, these cathedrals that Fulcanelli talked about, and I look at them and these things just happen to be indestructible. Not only are their architectonics so beautiful, that we look at them, they look like they are sculpted rock cut with like energy matter and a high frequency, intense harmonic situation or something, but they're indestructible by fire, by earthquakes, by natural disasters. The only time they get destroyed is when someone wants to build a Starbucks. Now, when I look at this, do you think that our wars, and this is a question for both of you, do you think World War One and World War Two were used as a catalyst to destroy Tartarian history?
Yeah, I think like Dresden, and you look at like Warsaw and Poland area and what was desecrated. And it seemed to be what I felt like was some of these places had a lot of underground access as well.
Definitely.
Right. Also, Russia and Alaska. So you see all across the Eastern Bloc, hundreds of cities completely decimated and replaced. But it goes back further, right? I think you go to 1812 and you start to see 1812 to 1860, a number of cities start to be destroyed and replaced across America and across Europe. Moscow burnt down, right? And series of explosions, earthquakes, places. The Year Without a Summer, that all happens before the World Wars. So the World Wars seem like a final cleanup in some respect, because at that point, all of the places that have been considering themselves Tartar are under the control of the Turkish. You know, eventually the Caliphate's under the control of the Reich, and they're under the control of the Vatican, and then the Vatican switches hands from the Germans to the Americans, and that seems to happen between World War I and World War II, right? So that seems to be the keys to the whole thing. Is we can look at the different names, like you said earlier about the Vinca, but the Vinca, group, but there's also like different catalytic peoples dependent on their linguistic patterns. So what they refer to them as changes based on their chronology. So Anatoly Fomenko comes up, right? The city that all of the timeline is completely shifted. And who is most likely to have shifted the timeline? The Catholic Church. So if the Vatican have control over the Tartar lands and are controlling the war effort, that explains a lot about World War I and World War II. It might more be the complete erasure of the historical records, not just the civilization, because the civilization is already conquered by World War I and World War II.
Wow. Julia, you've presented a lot on the Tartars, and you've gone into these subjects, and I know the both of you have, but could you guys explain to me the relevancy and to everyone watching of Vladimir Putin standing in front of this Tartarian map? I mean, obviously trying to show their heritage and where this leads to, but how deep down the rabbit hole do you think Putin has gone on the Tartarian subject?
I feel like he's kind of showing, like, look, this was like the greatest
Yeah.
empire and it could be even greater again. Like, showing it. Weren't a lot of world leaders, like, wouldn't they read? Didn't Victor cover that, Andreas, if they were like obsessed with reading books about Tartaria?
And we don't realize how much we're programmed to look forward to this already to begin with, right? The Soviet Union and the United States. The fact that we use this sort of map, right, that divides the world in this skewed way, showing the Western Hemisphere versus the Eastern, even though Russia and America are really like right next to each other, you can see them essentially touching, but we've moved it to make them seem like they're in the opposite ends of the earth. That's because there's an East and a West Tartary, right? That's the way that the Tartary Empire works. So I think you said it perfectly, John, that it's showing what has been and what can be again. So it's this offer to create this kind of new, alternative to a new world order. It's kind of a new world order, but it's this idea of kind of a confederated handshake of multipolarity.
That makes a lot of sense. And I know that a lot of our ancient symbolism and things that we've had passed down to us, be it religions or lost ancient sciences, people would consider like alchemy, come from these sort of ancient teachings that have been preserved down by our mystery schools and hidden through the veil of symbolism and so much more. But one thing that always fascinates me is that I truly believe that when we look at our universe, we look at energy, frequency, and vibration, like Tesla said. The secret to unlocking our physics is going to be harmonics. There's no doubt a huge key there. And when I look at those bells, and this is something I've been wanting to ask the both of you, because both of you have deep dived down this rabbit hole, like I said earlier. Julia's given talks about it, and so have you. When you look at these cathedrals that are out there, like the Notre Dame, and you look over in Paris, it seems like these bells that have been used have had all sorts of different purposes, and even their base. And some have even said that they're attuned to the perfect Hertzian frequency of the music of the spheres, like Pliny the Elder talked about. What do you guys think is the real secret to the Tartarian bells, and where have they gone?
Julia.
Oh, I feel like sound harmony, like to harmonize the cells in your body. I feel like it's conducive to our health. But were these, possibly a way to open up certain things, of like, could it have been used to summon certain things of like these places of worship wasn't just to just harmonize your cells, but like for certain contact. And, Eric Dollard, I have a couple of videos of where he's speaking about going to a cathedral in San Francisco, and it was during like astrological transit and during a solar flare, and that it was amplified when he sat in the particular spot in the cathedral. And he speaks of the organs, and he talks about, how it was a type of technology and how we can't recreate those now. Like they try to fix them, they can, they're kind of rigging it now, but it was so advanced, and that you can't recreate it. But the bells were significant because of the tunes and tones that they were able to play. And apparently when you play certain notes in a specific order, it harmonizes things, and it has a overall awesome effect on our bodies and our minds. And so knowing what tunes and in what order, and the somatics, and it's like sound alchemy that we've forgotten how to do that. And it kind of leads to diving into that, leads to, Rife and Royal Raymond Rife, and how he says like every disease lives in a frequency and dies in a frequency. It's about knowing like what frequency you need to play. So you would need to know what, if you're combating something, that you would need to know what frequency to then treat it with.
Right.
That's really brilliant. That's like what LL Cool J would say, rock the bells. But, when we look in Masonry, and a lot of people that have looked at the Masonic mysteries, for example, in our mystery schools there, when you go back into what they used to be called and where the origins of the name is, it comes from the artificers, like the Dionysian artificers, these builders, these craftsmen, these masons. In fact, in Rome, there was a secret society you may have heard of before called the Collegium Artificam, or the College of Artificers. And they also seeded religions and more. And they held these secrets of the ancient worlds in our architectonics. Like if you look on a government building in Europe or in Canada, or in these cathedrals, you'll see the triptych arch, like the three layers of the Trinity sort of thing. And
the cargo culted our democracies, right?
Exactly. So when we see these hidden secrets in these buildings and where they've been placed, how do you think they built these things? And do you think they had some sort of free energy? Either of you can answer this.
So I just wanted to like that, plus kind of in response to the last question as well, that frequencies, we're living in a biofield. So we've done interviews, especially Raphael and I have talked in Europa with a scientist from the Arab Emirates and from Germany, who builds these Rife style and these what do they call, the electric energy weather machines that can do weather changing, right? Can build storms in the desert. And those machines, he said, also affect people's mood and health and everything else, the same way that we have to worry about, cellular radiation and all the different kinds of microwave radiation. There's a positive and there's a negative harmony and disharmony that exists with them. So there's a system that affects both human health, but also affects the weather and affects energy flows. And a number of the bells, I think, are used for that. But what Julia touched on, this idea of opening portals, like this talks about something we mentioned earlier off the show about nonlinear time, and the idea that time is something that's outside of space. There's probably a non-local thought field that is reached by the singularity, that once something has reached the singularity that's come from the timeline, it stands reason it's protecting things retroactively back on the line of whatever it is that reaches the singularity point. So miracles that you're experiencing in your ancestral line could be forward created by something outside of time, right?
That was very well said.
Yeah, I think that's also a major reason for these certain sort of if it's something that's outside of time that's happening in an exception, it's certain maybe monks or spiritual groups that are able to exist in that outside of time. So they're the ones prone to seeing it or having access to this like data download, right? And it's usually
Yes.
referred to as something like that, where there's a data download and they're seeing geometry and math, right?
Like like in Malta, how it's cut, you come across these caves or these places in India that are the granite's cut in a particular very specific
Or
angle.
Montana, I saw today, right?
Really?
Yeah, there's a wall in Montana.
Oh, the
There,
sage wall?
do you know what's very interesting about Montana? If you're going to pull it up, Montana was very important to the Knights Templar, and actually, this was a place of great interest for Napoleon, also, as well as we know Montana today is one of the great places for missile defense in the United States. Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah. So I mean, everywhere.
But it's like it's tuned at a specific frequency. Some of these, a lot of them are like 111 hertz, and Pythagoras talked about that. That's the God frequency. But like, if there's different ways of contact or prayer, if you meditate in these rooms, what were they contacting or getting to show up or that
Yeah,
type of?
that makes sense. And I want to bring up something Julia talked about to me before the show. We were talking the other day about star forts, but before we get into that, I also wanted to bring up to what you were talking about with these causal mechanics. So I very much love that, how we could look at these buildings and these locations where they are is amplifiers, and no doubt we are interacting with these peristasis of oscillating thoughts all around us. So I think that's where it really gets interesting. One, just like you said, that before the show, we were talking about how time is a sentient existence woven into every subatomic particle, and this singularity seems to be a part of how all these things are working. This convergence that we see. Now, I want to talk about these star forts because this piqued my interest because I've spent a lot of time looking at stargates and places in Egypt, and I've a long time suspected that the ancient Egyptians and the groups that came before them that we hear about, that they most certainly could have been experimenting with electromagnetic energy and gravity. Do you think that these star forts were amplifiers for frequency, or what do you think they were doing? What was their purpose?
Yeah, I think a lot of them still are, right? So like there are still a lot of in use star forts today, and that's what they're used for. They're used like as military bases,
Right.
where they have armed. I mean, some of them have like data centers and energy, systems, and they have antennas and all sorts of towers. Others are just built into knockdown walls. It's true. There's a lot of places where they're disintegrated, but every single one of them is built in a place where there's water that converges around it. So it
Yeah.
seems like it's designed to create some sort of an energy flow wherever they're located. And there's a obvious physicality to resonance, right? If water is hitting it because it's at the ocean curve, then it's refracting water out again in these specific patterns and these specific dimensions. So everything about it is a certain energy field that is being produced. It's also all these resources that they're using to build them, certain kinds of quartz stones, so that when the concrete and the lime sets, it creates crystal. It makes it into this sort of antenna. Also mercury, there's evidence that they use mercury pools in certain positions. I mean, a
Yes.
lot of them are really sophisticated. But yeah, it's interesting that there's some of them are just completely wiped off. Like we looked at lidar pictures in Canada actually of completely erased star forts.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, because we know that there's like cells in Singapore that they can be amplified and tuned harmonically into crystals. And what I'm reminded of when you were talking about that is in Egypt, there's a place called Zayet El Arian, and people can look that up. It's near Abu Sir and Abu Ghraib. And since the 1950s, and Julia, you know all about this place. I really want you to remote view it, which I hope that you do soon. But at Zayet El Arian, it's got an unfinished pyramidal complex that has a subterranean complex underneath it, the size of New York City, where aircraft can come and go from. It says literally in the insignias of not only that place, but the various pyramids around it, that the king that was involved with it, and when you look at like his cartouche, you look at his name, he has the title Stargate in front of him, just like Tutmosis III did in the 18th dynasty. But this particular area, I've heard rumors when I was out for dinner with guys, even a guy that was very highly involved in the antiquities, that there's like a plasma-like colors that come out of the ground, like aurora borealis, and they refer to it as Stargate. It just very clearly says that Sabah. So it's fascinating these places exist, and then the military comes in there or whatever they're going to do. But it seemed like you were going to say something there, Julia, about this place.
Oh, I just really want to remote view it. It's really fascinating of what sits beneath there. And what did they say about the military runs it? What military?
British and American military. They have very, very much invested interest since the 1950s. Anyone who's been in archaeology and whatnot that tries to step near that place, they get shoved away. And it's a fascinating place. But on another note, there's another thing that both of you were saying that I really thought was important. And you see this you see the use of stone being carefully placed, whether it's an obelisk or wherever, whether you're going up to Rudolph II's castle over in Prague or wherever you're going, you're seeing like a rose granite obelisk. You're seeing very particular uses of stone, and of course granite being the most popular among them. Granite contains silica, and what do we get from silica? That we get like silicon, like we get with our microchips. It's a great insulator and conductor of electromagnetic energy, just like quartz piezoelectrical energy. So these places, no doubt, are places of power that the elites look at, right?
That's why I wonder if that's why there's so much activity in Yosemite, because I think it has the largest amount of granite in the world there. And that being so piezoelectric, and what that's able, people talk about portals opening up, them going and entering it and coming back, and those are the ones that survive, and some of them don't come back.
Like fairy treaties. So there's this idea that most of the state, like all the parks weren't created because of like ecological concerns of Roosevelt, but that he was actually performing fairy treaties, and whatever fairy treaties meant, but just this idea that we were protecting certain lands because otherwise nature itself would attack us and destroy us. And take that as far as you need to go, whether or not there's like fairies or things like Bigfoot that are disappearing people on those lands. But it's anomalous, right? Like all these reports of some sort of bipedal hominid that's different than humans, and the fact that we're always told not to worry about it, but also always talked about all the time. There's like TV shows about JFK, aliens from Roswell, and Bigfoot. So what's the deal with the state park thing? But if it's that there's a non-local space time, and these state parks are places that are kind of protected because they're outside of time, and that's why people aren't supposed to go into them, it starts to make more sense why things are so weird, because a lot of these stories are people that disappear for periods of time, right? Maybe you're gone for like 20 days in the woods. There's a weird one for me, is this girl in Yosemite disappears. She's like 7 or 8 years old or something like that. And she meets some lady along the trail. And this lady is like, oh, you're lost too? Here, let's like camp together. We'll find our way out tomorrow. And the next day she like leaves, and the lady gets lost again, and the kid makes her way back. And so then she's been gone for more than a day. She's been gone for like 20 days, but it only felt like one day to the kid. And when she describes the lady who helped her in the woods, it's like exactly the same as a lady who disappeared 20 years earlier.
Wow.
And these are the kinds of things. So it's like, okay, these are weird stories about people disappearing in, Yosemite, or people disappearing in Yellowstone, like this pair of boots that disappeared in Yellowstone. This kid disappears in Yellowstone. They find his boots again later. And, everyone looked everywhere, and all of a sudden they're just polished there. And then a year later, they find like his notebook and everything. And it's like, it's more like he's disappearing or flipping through moments in time, right? That's what it feels like, more than your average ghost story or fairy story. It seems like it's an outside of time location.
I found it fascinating that so many of them that disappear in national parks that don't come back, they have a lot of them have this blood disorder, and it's called PNH, and it's a condition where the red blood cells break apart prematurely and lead to symptoms like dark colored urine, fatigue, and increased risk of blood clots. But then, like, what scans you when you enter for them to know that? Like, that's extremely fascinating. It's like, is that why they were selected? I mean, even David Pallades talks about like how a lot of the physicists that go missing are German physicists.
Yeah, it's very interesting. A lot comes to mind as you guys are talking. First of all, there's a story of Llewellyn and Rhys. That's a famous Welsh story about them going missing in a fairy circle. And we know about fairy circles, just like crop circles and all the phenomena around that. But as for national parks, I wouldn't put it past not only Theodore Roosevelt, to have had that sort of inspiration, because his major connection to national parks, we know, came through John Muir, who in 1903, they took that famous camping trip up there. And that's where he said he found God. But most certainly, there's all kinds of things that are hidden in those national parks. And not only from the pre-mound builders up at the Grand Canyon, which many that they think it's Egyptian, but there's something even far more ancient there. And I know Julia's covered that story, and she's looked at that very thoroughly as well. And you guys have dug into those ones. But in the chat, Crypto Alchemist had mentioned Canadian national parks. Now, there's some very interesting stories, not only about Sasquatch or Bigfoot and all the people that were taller, just as you guys mentioned, but there's a book out there, a very interesting book, if you're interested in that sort of history, and it is by John B. Leith. It's called Genesis for the Space Race, and it includes a story about Mackenzie King, the former Prime Minister of Canada during World War II. We look over at Winston Churchill and FDR, Franklin D. Roosevelt, and they were worried about the Germans developing round-wing crafts, so they went deep into the wilderness. And this alleges that not only was there strange things going on in the British Columbian wilderness, but they went out there and they built a deep, unpenetratable forest base that you needed a train to get through. And they started to reverse engineer not only UFOs, but strange things allegedly happened, like ET visitors and all kinds of things opening up with portals and whatnot. So, yeah, I think there is something that's very strange going on in national parks, period.
Andreas, what did you tie with the iridium and like dwarves and caves?
So the Alvira's hypothesis is that there was some sort of an extinction event that happened, right? And so a lot of people refer to like the dinosaurs as this like extinction event, or that it was a long period of time ago, that it was like 65 million years ago. And so it's not really an exact definitive time. It's not necessarily that it was that long ago. And we might have been thinking time was more gradual when there was cataclysmic change. It might have been something more recent, but there's a layer of iridium that is what we consider to be this extinction event. And so where the iridium comes from is an interesting question, because it's not something that seems to exist anywhere in nature, or something that looks like it's fabricated from inside the planet. So how we get this layer on the outside and then everything builds on top of it, is it something that comes through a superheated event, like maybe like a pressurized volcanic eruption makes something so hot that it creates an atomic blast? And there are natural atomic flumes like Gabon in Africa. It could be that there's just nuclear blasts that create alchemical electron flumes that are creating 77 iridium and coating the entire world with it. But it's not, no one's exactly sure exactly where all the iridium comes from that layer, but just that one layer, right? And so anything that would have lived at that point would be dead unless it was something that went underground, and so it had to live underground for a period of time, maybe centuries, right?
Absolutely. It's the whole thing about history is that without history, life's a mystery. And I would like to point out that in my various travels and people that I've talked to that have been connected to the royal family or even the various royal houses, they have alleged to me that there is most certainly a history that is not taught to the public. Tartaria has come up in that conversation, but there's one history for the general public, and there's one that sits behind that. And I think that there's a number of folks on this planet that want to collect historical artifacts like that and keep it to themselves for the advantages they have. What advantages do you think have been captured from our ancient past, if any? Like, I'm talking about advances in our sciences and our militaries. Do you suppose that any of these advanced lost ancient technologies have been studied and applied into modern purposes?
Yeah, for sure. So like all of the modern building techniques or free energy harvesting from large skyscrapers, everything from even like lightning rods and like the slow release of Benjamin Franklin lightning rods, this idea that energy can be ground in these DC engines and motors that exist underneath in the bottom floor from harnessed energy sources. Uh Everything, like planes, even just the idea of everyone in their pocket having a i386 or an ARM processor that's this scaled version of a temple, this like certain calculator that everyone has access to so they can ask a billion questions, this mechanical genie that everyone has access to. It's like a uniform goal. Even denim, like just the idea of denim, just jean, like the way that it's stitched together, the certain kind of knot that's done, that's like an ancient Egyptian pattern that was only for priests, right? So all of it's been taken so that it could be conformed into a reality that you could have, like that kids could wear, like any American kid, like a Canadian American could wear a pair of jeans and a pair of like Fruit of the Loom cotton underpants, right? Like this is just sort of priest, those are like priest garments, essentially. They're just presented for everyone to have access to. But
yeah, now China apparently figured out how to make lots of priest garments for Louis Vuitton and everyone else. It's on the news. But William Powell says here, he says batteries in India thousands of years ago. And I would definitely agree with that. There's battery cells that we find the greatest of all. And that's the one thing that we've really been held back on, is the wet cell battery. If you look at all the other advancements we've had, and this goes back again to that convergence of the singularity you were talking about. I personally have always been fascinated by what Colonel Philip Corso wrote in his book, The Day After Roswell, about when you look over, and I know Julia's seen this stuff before, and I'm not sure if you have either, what his comparisons are, but if you look over at everything we've had from Velcro to transistors to LEDs to nitinol, which is nickel and titanium memory metal, which we use in dental applications and also in military, it's absolutely fascinating. But there are bodies to this day, speaking of radiation, that we still can't unsheath in those areas in India. There's just incredible things. And I think that's why Oppenheimer and all these others were fascinated when we look at the Mahabharata or any of these ancient texts. So what do you think is the real reason, though, we've been held back from so much of this history? Why has this been wiped from common knowledge?
I would say that the longer that it's kept from us, then the longer history can continue on. Like the more history exists until the singularity hits. So it's just essentially keeping everything from happening so that it sustains existence struggling towards that goal. So you never allow it to reach the goal, but eventually it's inevitable. So then we're so close to the goal. So they just keep taking the goal from us every few generations, just making it but I think we probably have only like 20, 30 years left anyway before time ends, right?
That's interesting. Well, it definitely, as you and I discussed before with Julia there, that time is that one aspect that gives all carnal existence its free will. And it is an incredible thing. And we live in this world of dualities. And I think if you were to use, let's say, let's say we went to go create another universe, and we use quantum machining with a few molecules or something, and we made it so we could just live forever. Things would be quite boring. It would get quite stale quickly. If 1 second would seem like a million years or something would go by. So it's definitely useful in our universe for processing all of this. Julia, where do you think we have lost touch with the science of water? Because I've spent a lot of time talking to various people about this, like Maria Wheatley, who's looked over at Avebury and Stonehenge and looked at the various patterns. And you mentioned water earlier, Andreas, and various sites that we see a lot of activity around. But I know Julia's looked at this a lot on what they knew, and even the Cathars and others had various stones and places where healing water was coming out. Do you think this was a Tartarian knowledge?
The fact that water is programmable, and like I love the information of that they did at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory, and they made a discovery related to quantum tunneling involving water molecules in extremely tight spaces. They found that water molecules can quantum tunnel when trapped inside a tight, six-sided hexagonal quartz structure. So that right there, then, remember that information of the walking through walls, that patent? Remember that of the water, but quantum tunneling, what? Particles don't play by normal rules. They have the superpower and can teleport. That absolutely blows my mind.
I agree with you. Harmonic resonance would play a key there too. You can change subjective reality. It takes very little energy to change the atoms, or even when we go break it down to particles and whatnot, it takes very little energy to change them in your body. So if you're not vibrating at an aspect that's relative to the floor below you, you'd fall right through the floor, or you could float through walls and change the aspects of things. I do believe that the ancients had ways of healing that were far more advanced than we would even think. Like when you go to Saqqara in Egypt, there's these water systems that people have looked at for a long time. And the Great Pyramid, one of its functions, point of fact, was probably a water pump at times, and in one of its many uses, or a power plant, or used for portals and all sorts of different things. But this aspect of sound, energy, vibration, even water being tied to it, seems to be important. What do you both think is the greatest secret we have lost from the Tartarians or our ancient civilizations? What is the magnum opus aspect of this? What is the greatest secret?
I feel like it's how to heal and thrive. I feel like sound alchemy and the knowledge of frequencies and how to use them. And that's what's so inspiring for me about Tartarians, so significant, is that they knew how to thrive. And so showing a lot of these buildings are set up in a certain way where they can harness free energy, atmospheric energy. And our DNA is absolutely amazing. We have this tech that's inside of us, and we've just kind of forgotten how to utilize it. But that it's so inspiring and hopeful of hold on here, there's things we could do to live longer and have this amazing life, instead of just focusing on the suffering and the fighting and the warring and the pain and all of that.
Yeah, I think Julia put it succinctly. There could be a civilization paralleling our own that has free energy in a way that uses equipment that existed already, centuries ago, that we're relatively familiar with. And it seems like we're moving backwards, trying to move away from that sometimes. But at the same time, it seems inevitable that we fall into that anyway, because at a certain point, anything else falls apart. So at some point, it just falls back into what is this eternal thing, which is why also Tartaria seems so alluring, because it's something that exists in the past. It also exists in the future. What is it about that makes it so outside of time, right?
Yeah, no, I definitely can agree with you there.
Wondered really quick. I've wondered, I brought this up on Team Rabbit Hole the other day of were certain things implemented into our food and into our air and all of that. You saw with opiates, there was a rise of access level to certain pharmaceuticals and even with insulin and certain things. And then all of a sudden it became harder to get certain pharmaceuticals. And I was like, is this kind of a ploy, knowing what's coming in this technological advancements that are going to be implemented? Like, is it making people more like, where there's so much damage that's been done to their health and their body, where they're more open to sign up for certain things, where they'll download their meds, like download their or have to implement like a thing, like a tech like Neuralink, that they would be more open to doing such a thing because they've been so damaged and effed off, like I wondered if that was, knowing what's coming, if that was a strategic move to get more people, because it's such an addiction based, subscription based society everywhere with everything. So wanting to get more people willing to sign up for certain things like that, where they're, what I guess was that transhumanism?
I mean, I think it's post-humanism. It depends how far you take it. So, post-humanism is the idea of trying to get away from humanity into something else, right? And transhumanism should be the idea, which is originally Christianity, was originally called transhumanism. It's like a really ancient, like a very old words, like from the 1600s, but it means to go through the entirety of what it is to be human. So like to transform or transcend like the entirety of humanity, or the humanities of being a human. And so it really refers to, like, if you're a kid in a wheelchair, or you have a fake leg or something like that, then that's a form of transhumanism, because you're expanding or trying to give them the full human experience, right? So often it's like if you've been damaged, it's something that tries to compensate for that damage. And arguably everyone's damaged. A big one with transhumanism is aging. So if you can do age-related diseases, if you could defeat those, what would humans be like if they didn't get Alzheimer's, dementia, or failed livers and diabetes and everything else like that, high blood pressure, heart disease? If you didn't have those, would you live to be 120 or 200, or would you look 40 at 70? What are the rules exactly about aging, and how do we look at that as a human thing, right?
That makes sense. And, when we see where we're headed in our transhumanism, there's no doubt going to be a lot of medical advancements, like Julia was saying. Right now, when we look at Neuralink, for example, it's only using 5,000 synapses, and we can bring back someone that might be paralyzed, but we have, hundreds of trillions synapses, or we have ways to expand beyond that are going to blow our minds in the future, such as having micro tissues on our skin that can change, to being able to heal all kinds of things in the body. But I want to ask this, when we talk about let's go back to this singularity and how it relates to our ancient civilizations, or like what Julia was talking about, with us expanding into these new ways of transpositioning ourselves into a new area, to use that word again. Do you suppose that the survivors of these lost ancient civilizations that reached the peak in their technical developments and where they were headed, and they understood the universe in a far better way than we did, they reached their singularity, do you suppose that they are watching over humanity as like our gardeners, and they look at us at our current stage of development as a great zoological experiment? And do you suppose that, since the algorithm for reality is quite complex, that there are folks in the future that are trying to change us now, and folks in the past that are trying to change us, so it's constantly changing, like a Japanese sword maker putting layer upon layer on this edge? So I guess what I'm asking you is, like, we get this idea in all of our ancient mythos of, whether we look at Dagon, the fellow with the mitre or the fish hat that came to the ancient Babylonians, or you look at Osiris to the ancient Egyptians. Do you suppose that these folks seeded us with our knowledge and our religions and our philosophies?
So
Like like missionaries or
I
survivors.
feel them watching like this, like, just like, just like, I feel that we are we could be we doing so much better. Like so much better.
Well,
Do I think they seeded us? I like the thought of, you hear that they messed with our telomeres, or, they shortened our telomeres and tinkered with our DNA. And it really resonated with me, the thought of that they made, and this is taking it way out there, but that's where I like to go. But of that they tinkered with us and made it to where we can have a co-pilot, like where they tinkered with something to where something can enter us and experience things because they maybe cannot, but that fascinating. And then you get down to like the demon possession and that whole rabbit hole, but the fact that there's things that are able to experience things through you, and that it wasn't always like that, and something was tinkered with to make it like that. Like, it's deep, but
yeah, I think that like if things are outside of time, then time itself is still an important linear causality that leads to the outside of
yes.
time. So that's why there's like a treaty system, because there's something that has to be protecting time from Big Bang to potential apocalypses, or this like 7-dimensional thread of realities that can happen. So they have to be, certain protections have to be kept to keep that, like time variance authority is what they introduced in Disney for Loki, right? This idea that there's like a time variance authority that keeps the universes safe. But something like that essentially. And the time itself, when it gets outside of that time, then something can go back to the beginning. So I think that there are people, not like our ancestors per se, but we are the ancestors of this thing. The gods are our grandchildren, kind of a thing. The gods that created us that you're talking about are our grandchildren. But it's not that they created us, because all intelligences have existed forever. So it's kind of like the Veda describes that there's a material time that exists, and this is that yuga that's happening now, and then it ends in a Dvapara, which is this energy, it's kind of a pure energy that mass devolves into or compresses into, which it seems more likely is that energy gets to a singularity and there's no room in between it. It's just pure energy. And that's, the thing that's outside of time.
that's something of it. See, I told you, Vishnu Metatron had a baby. Andreas,
Definitely. By the
something
way,
he would say.
Julius, someone just wrote in the comments, Godheart Guardian said, if these parasites weren't there, we would be thriving. And this is something you're always telling people.
Yeah, because and I want to do a study about people that have demon possession really bad, or they have like an entity attachment that they can't get rid of. Is it tied? Is it a tapeworm, a hookworm, a roundworm? Like, is it like as within is without, as above is below, where something etherically can then enter and embody that parasite? Or like for it, like it's very fascinating to me. And it seems like just the fall in consciousness too is like when they stopped cleansing, because in the 30s they were still doing it to the horses, the cats, the dogs, the children, and every the equinox is starting the process, and then cleansing, and then with that being kept out of the medical curriculum and just out of it was no longer implemented, and people stopped doing that, and then the rise in cancers, the rise in illness, and the fall of consciousness, I completely feel like it's connected, like it's throwing off a lot. And yeah, I agree with Godheart.
Yeah, it's absolutely amazing. And when you look at parasites, the interesting thing about them, and we could tie this into the non-locality stuff too, especially if we look at consciousness as a non-local awareness. But with parasites, think about how fascinating it is that 98 to 99% of all life is existing as nanobacteria. Think about how many, like, what is it, 6 or 7 kilos you have on your body of things living on you that are oscillating with you, moving with you. Think about how many energetic forms we have and how we're interacting on so many different levels and subspaces. It's really incredible how, I guess, for lack of better terms, multidimensional our interactions are. And a lot of people out there, this is a little off topic, but a lot of people also construe the word dimension in different ways. It really, when you look in your room, when you think about dimensions, if you walk from one end to the other, you're in another dimension in your room. So I think it's a fascinating correspondence also by looking at time as a dimension of this interaction of reality. So with
wait, what did Jesus say though? In my Father's house, there's many mansions or houses. There's like kingdoms within us of like in different areas in our body and like micro organ. Like it's crazy to think of all the living things inside of us.
Those aren't P. Diddy mansions. They're not all connected with secret passageways, but yeah, no, that is fascinating. So do you suppose that these folks, they didn't die, they weren't wiped out, the ancients, that they just came to this point in this convergence of consciousness and the universe and evolution in a very similar way to our quantum computing is now, that that we just got to a certain point where they move forward? And with that, I want to ask, I have a question for you, Andreas, that this was sparked by something Julia said. Actually, she was talking about DNA earlier and how DNA is so amazing. It looks like an antenna. It's got the duplexing and the windings for distance. And of course, we have that morphogenetic field around the Earth that Rupert Sheldrake talks about. Do you suppose that these earlier civilizations could have a type of AI that's all around us already, that we're interacting with an AI super intelligence?
Yeah, it's gonna be crazy like in a few years, because that's what a lot of these tech companies want to do, is like get rid of screens, and then eventually we'll live in a world that just has, Siri everywhere, and then people that know how to use the developer mode will use magic words to get special features out of it. So it'll just be like, you know what I mean? Like that could easily have existed in the past. But even just from the way DNA works, right? Because we're talking about quantum computers that are frequency based and are able to pick up on radio, and there are different stars that are all producing different radio signals, which are unidirectional, that you could have frequencies that particularly work with certain genetic lines. There are a number of different ways that they could be affected, that different people can be affected by different frequencies that are already out there, whether those are natural or those are synthetic, if they're conscious or if there's some sort of automated system, that's like philosophical question, but they definitely affect people.
Did you guys, this is one of Julia's areas with remote viewing, but Julia, I don't know if you saw that with people talking about that I know the CIA had Project Stargate. Yeah, Dr. Hal Puthoff, Uri Geller, Ingo Swann, Pat Price, and all those folks. But there was Project Sunstreak, and I think it was CIA.gov that put out that document that if you were focusing on a part of your body, and it's this reminded me of what you're talking about, like a cheat code to
like
this
5555, that one.
Yeah, that one, that you could make pain go away in the body. Have you tried that? Do you know? Did it work for you?
I tried it. I don't remember what happened. So,
well, you gotta wait till you got like a headache or something.
Yeah, it's practical. It's practical if you're like in an extremely hot or extremely cold situation, or you have to go to the bathroom.
That's the code to get into the restroom at Chipotle. 55515. You have to go to the bathroom. Just use it. But there was another thing that came out. Yeah, we've seen books come out over the years by like Michael Talbot, put out The Holographic Universe, talking about how things work like subatomic particles, like a hologram. And there's all kinds of interesting aspects of reality we find in there, where he's, got a story of a fellow that goes over to, his name is Tom, goes to a house. There's a hypnotist there. He starts to see giraffes in the room, and he sees somebody sitting in a chair. Well, it's actually his daughter, and he presses up a watch to the back of her neck and back. And on the other side, this fellow Tom is able to read out what the hypnotist is holding up on the watch inscription, showing us that reality is not made of what we think it is. And I wanted to ask either of you, did you guys see that buzz that's going around about people doing DMT, taking dimethyltryptamine in a vape pen or something, and then they shine a red laser and they see like code coming across it? making people think that maybe because so many folks see this when they try it, that there is something else going on to our reality that we're not aware of.
Yeah, I mean, I think the reality is not necessarily digitally programmed, but that's a good reference point for an atheist. So a lot of people that grew up being told that there isn't anything at all needed to be explained how in a microscopic scaled way things that they are familiar with do scale to a macroscopic reality or like a teleological reality. There's an epistemology, all these words, right? Like they actually lead to something that you can do with your mind, and that's something that they were told wasn't true, that there wasn't a god or whatever a god is, right? So they're looking at it saying, oh, the universe is a program, but it's not that different than a program. That's just like the easiest way maybe to describe to someone who works with programs or understands computers. But it's also an actual thing. Like I think Julia used the word like creatrix, right? Like instead
I
of a
like that.
matrix. Yeah, I like that a lot too, because it's not just a program, it's whatever you use in terms of small pieces. It's the left and right brain, right? You're making a giant milieu of ideas out of these little pieces, and whatever the pieces are that you're willing to work with are. They could be little pieces of code, but the problem with that is that that's a very binary, and you should probably use something more analog, like ranges of color or something like that. There are better ways to describe your universe. You shouldn't be locked into that paradigm. And I think that's the thing a lot of people used to see before the mass hysteria about code with DMT was sacred geometric shapes, right? And
Yeah.
I think that's like the fundamental thing, is that we're trying to figure out how forms come together, right? And make symbolic logic.
Andres, can you tell everyone what your nanotechnology background is and if that like reshaped how you look at the world?
Yeah, that's for sure, actually. So, okay, so I studied nanotechnology and my like material fabrication and nano material
Wow.
science. One of the first things that we looked at was really tiny scanning electron microscopy pictures of like sand on the beach or different kinds of materials, and they look like these radical little spacey super shapes. They're these beautiful stars or
Amazing.
triangles, and they're super powerful. Like they're fortified shapes. They're very strong shapes. They're not going to break, which is crazy how tiny they are, but there's something that's so strong that can fit together, and they can be used for electrostatic or for covalent bonds, right? Things that you wouldn't expect them to be able to just naturally produce. But it turns out that that's the most natural thing to form, either because that's what broke everything else polishes down, or more likely because that's what bottom up is created by some strange natural process that makes this like beautiful shape because of some Mendelbrot living math, frequency or scale.
That's incredible. It's amazing how we program those things too. You take like a little silicon hexagonal structure that's one atom thick, and then they move along this geosynchronistic orbit of the body, just like Buckminster Fuller's Fullerites
Totally.
and everything. How do they program the end of that with like hydrogen bonds, or what is the
So
process?
basically, you learn biomimicry, and you're trying to do the same chemical reactions or biochemical reactions that some form as some form of biology has proven it can be accomplished, and then you just hack on that and try to repeat the same task over and over again. So they make bioelectric MEMS, right? Like these like tiny little biological engines that will literally just use hydrogen, or they might have some sort of a methylene envelope that releases some sort of an energy ATP, and they have ATP based engines that'll work, or they can hold on to any, they can build an alpha methylene or some sort of a dimethylene envelope that will hold different drug releases, and they can have different drugs that will released at different times throughout the body over and over again.
That's
and all that's pretty good.
fascinating. You know? That's fascinating. That reminds me very much how we really got our technology for using, like the submarine, for example, biomimicry, by studying the trout in the water and that slime that it goes around it. We get that electroline, and then hence what we do when we're traveling very fast underwater, we get the diamagnetic effect. So it's really incredible how much we can learn by studying nature and the universe and where we go from there. I have another question for both of you then. With our fascination that we have right now, that we seem to be waking up, we seem to be remembering. Do you suppose, and I know you touched down on this a little bit earlier, about, coming to this awareness, but do you suppose that this is a natural inclination, like someone waking up from an amnesia, that we are coming to this? Is just a knowing inside of ourselves, our cellular memory, maybe, this with this fractal that we have of it? Or is it being fed to us intentionally? Are we being given a trail of breadcrumbs right now, this fascination with our past?
I think it's really our reality is so fragile and so new that we forget like how different reality is right now than it was like 20 or 30 years ago, or 100 years ago. But that frequencies have become so normalized because we're constantly inside of this same Wi-Fi field, which I remember even just 20 years ago, I could go to different countries and they felt like very different than each other. There were different airs, a different radio, different biofields that existed, and they weren't as uniform around the world. Now anywhere I go kind of feels like it's inside of the same Grand Theft Auto video game. Like everything has the same frequency or the same balance to it. And I think that if you turn it off, if you're able to get into a space where that's turned off, it's a very strong difference. It's a very strong difference if you're outside of electricity, away from your phone. In, you said Yellowstone or Yosemite, like some of those places, the energy feels completely different and like otherworldly. And we're reacting to that. And that's a major part of why people are so confused by this thing that's supposed to be completely naturalized, because it's not really natural, and nature hasn't completely adapted to this bionic new frequency yet, right?
What do you recommend for people, Andreas, of how to combat that? Like, what do you recommend for people?
Oh, I don't know, Julie. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. It's hard. Like redwood trees. I don't know what do you want to?
You like drink pine needle tree tea?
I think
well, that's
it's hard. You gotta get grounded, right? It's like a hard one. Like, how do you actually get grounded?
Also, Andreas, can you tell everyone your NASA background experience?
I mean, through the nanotechnology material science, I did an internship for NASA, and so worked at Moffett Field doing stoichiometric indexing, and also used the Stanford telescope, atomic force microscope, but just call it the telescope because it's like 20 feet long. It's this giant room built. Yeah, it's pretty crazy, but it's pretty useful for looking at what parts of which materials make up which stoichiometric like arrangements of atoms, right? So we're able to figure out like what patterns can be rematerialized, again, like biomimicry. Like the whole idea is, what can we do? And that's why I was going to say earlier, like, you don't really want to make a drug release kit if you don't have to. Like, that's something that's still halfway back to the original plan, which is figuring out how does nature protect itself? Like, how does apoptosis work? Or can we make some sort of a adenoviral that is like your youthful DNA that like stores your clipper, your telomeres?
I think through nanotechnology, I would go to Kurzweil, and what he said about the foglets being able to unlock the mitochondria. Mitochondria is absolutely fascinating. We were talking about that the other day on the show, on how it's so alien to the body.
Wait, for everyone to know, Johnny, you have a pharmacology degree?
Yeah, I have a background in pharmacology, and
Nice.
I'm Canadian, so we were talking about maple syrup earlier, and Drake, because we
want to pour maple syrup all over Drake. That's what we were saying.
That's a whole other
our
subject.
fantasy. It's our fantasy. It's out of the bag.
It's out of the bag now. Everybody knows. But
while the grassy theme song is playing.
Yeah, absolutely. But going into Kurzweil's ideas about foglets, this idea is really fascinating that we had unlocked the mitochondria. We have this surge of electrons already and energy, and the how the mitochondria works in the body is so fascinating. But by doing so, you could use the nitrogen and hydrogen from outside of your body, which I believe I believe it's already been achieved. I think we're so close to having it in the next 10 years. And they will look at full telomere or reversal of telomere degradation, and you will have this equilibrium stasis with breaking this threshold. And I think that this is an incredible thing about it with nanotech and where we're going with that. But it has so many other possibilities in our evolution, and someone's clearly tampered with our DNA. They've been working at it for a while, and
there's some weird stuff that seems like we've had viruses in our ancient ancestral past that we're still living with the epigenetic changes, not just epigenetics, but like just literally genetic changes going back. In terms of our weakness, we're a tenth of the strength of like average hominids and gorillas, right? We're super weak. There's a lot of questions you have to wonder.
But do you know? I know there's going to be folks out there that don't agree with me on this, but I think it's because, like, if you go back 50,000 years ago, I truly think that the hominids there had an easier time. We had less gravity on the planet, more oxygen, I would think. And another thing that when we start to see evolution, how it's changed, you couldn't bring the dinosaurs back right now if you wanted to. They wouldn't be able to function. I think Jurassic Park would be a great myth in this current aspect. But with that, it's very
well, like the whales are giant mammals, right? That have fingers and toes that are 100 feet tall. So we're definitely, I mean, the vapor, I see your point with the vapor canopy.
Yes.
But yeah, we definitely lived at some point with a much, a different world with giants. Yeah. Recently, probably.
What do you think about this idea of giants? I mean, we've heard of the Denisovans that are from Julia's favorite area that everybody knows she wants to take a vacation to in Siberia. Right now, they found these Denisovans in 2008, I believe it was. And I think when I look at their migration, or the Scythians, and we look at all different types of legends in Hungary that they had with these Taltosh, these shamans talking about giants, I think those could have been the folks that built the top part of the Great Pyramid, because it's my belief that the top part of the Great Pyramid is not even as old as the Sphinx, and it's not even close to being as old as the moon temples that are underneath the Giza Plateau. But what do you think about this idea of giants? This is a question for both of you, since we're talking about ancient hominids.
If we're talking about the vapor canopy, like, was everything perhaps larger at one point? Like, was everything silica based and we became carbon based? Like, perhaps there was a time where everything was larger.
Right. There seems like there are giant animals everywhere, and we see it to this day. And then not that long ago, that's the other thing we're talking about, like dinosaurs, like people were living with giant reptiles, and birds are reptiles, and birds are dinosaurs, right? They're dinosaurs.
That's why everybody eats something like, you say to them, hey, a guy over there eating a snake, what does that taste like? They always say chicken. Somebody today asked them, they said they were eating a frog, and I said they had some frog, and they said it tastes like chicken. So there's always this bird connection that we find all the way through. But
but birds are just dinosaurs, and so all the dinosaurs were a much more recent thing than people. I mean, essentially, they were in the human lifetime. They're not something that we evolved far after. There might have been pre-extinction event creatures that existed, but a lot of them existed in our lifetime. But the pre-extinction event seems like it's the vapor canopy, and so the vapor canopy would explain the difference between super avians and submarine mammals that are so big, right? So if whales were 100 feet, or are 100 feet, these giant sperm whales that are 100 feet or so, then it explains why people are talking about 100-foot giants. Most of the giants that we're seeing in the most recent within our own reality, essentially after the extinction event, those are like 13 feet to 10 feet. They're not maybe 15 feet or something, but they're not like the 100 feet mammals. However, the fact that whales exist are alive today, I think that kind of says something about the vapor canopy.
It's absolutely incredible when we look at all this biodiversity, and it really makes us go back into our ancient texts. Let's say with our creation stories. You reminded me of this with Julia's word. What was it? The creatrix. I like that. And we've often talked about a Garden of Eden, and I tend to believe that there is potential for two Garden of Edens. That I see a strangeness on our planet. The people have often hypothesized that near the Tigris and the Euphrates River, there's more of a biblical reference. But when you look at what's going on over in Australia, now there's a whole other different situation there. Not only their animals and the biodiversity is very, very strange. It's a rather fantastic idea. Do you suppose it's possible in the various theories that you've looked at? I mean, for both of you, that various groups came to the earth after these different cataclysmic events or extinction events, and they reseeded the earth. Let's say groups that migrated here from I saw someone in the chat bring up Emmanuel Velikovsky, who had some very interesting cosmological ideas. Do you think that different groups came here and helped seed us, like the old Elohim Anunnaki story? Or do you think it was a panspermia? It's all happened by natural evolution unfolding. What do you suppose?
I've wondered if panspermia, like meteors, is what, like, of how certain like viruses or things or illness happens. Like, so I think ancient soil samples are really fascinating of looking. Like, but I was just like, what are meteors?
Yeah.
What are
That's
meteors?
true. It's true. The biogenetic technologies are very interesting, and that's again that goes into something both of you have talked about. I know, Julia, you were talking about this recently over in LA on a panel with AI. I think AI just opened up Pandora's box, just giving us that when it comes to biogenetic technologies and what we can do with it, even and pharmacologically, biologically, and in every area. It's just game over. It's done.
I think that a super intelligence like a god, or something that someone would describe as a god, is an inevitable evolutionary progression according to our beliefs of the laws of evolution, right? Like, this is something that should happen, likely, in all terms of probability, in terms of how big reality is, the Drake equation, that intelligent species would happen like us, then something would eventually reach this all-knowing, all-powerful, omnipotent, omnipresent creator, like existence that's outside of time, again, like we're saying. And if that's the case, and you're talking about like the Stradinian omega point, and if this omega point exists, then it's going to affect time itself. So even though it's not an original initial god, so I go with kind of a Promethean view that there's sort of already intelligences that have already existed, have always existed, but that some sort of a godhead, an Elohim family emerges, and that is associated with the creation, that we are the creation. Our ancestral line is somehow tapped into whatever transpires with this godhead.
I love how you normally refer to God as her, right, Andreas?
Yeah.
Her.
So I think so. I'll say, like, if you want to make God laugh, tell her your plans, right? And I think there's definitely like a super feminine aspect of God. But I think God is like probably multiple people, right? So Elohim is plural. So if it was Eloi, you would say singular, but Elohim is the plural word of that.
It's interesting when we look at where we got this patriarchal aspect that going into our ancient cultures, because there was a certain strength there in builders and those that were putting together things like with hard labor. That's according to the esoteric traditions like Manly P. Hall would talk about. But nearly every near-death experience survivor I've talked to, and I know there's going to be those out there that are skeptics of near-death experiences, and I think it's interesting to look at the brain when it's dying. Some people try to say that it doesn't happen due to hypoxia or a lack of oxygen to the brain, and we'd get like a minor hallucination or something. But the very real, long-lasting experiences people have had during near-death experiences, they all experience when they go through this experience of God or being in this omnipresence. This feeling they have is a feminine, divine, nurturing feeling. So my friend Daniel Brinkley always does that the same way. He always says that he always blames it on her. Like he says, "Oh, she must not have been so happy with the Philistines." But back over to this idea that we always evolve to this supreme intelligence. How far off do you think we are until we get synthetic intelligence? How far off do you think until we're going to move out of the absolutes of today's computing and ones and zeros and move full on into quantum computers that are interacting with us in our home space or robots, so to say?
So inevitable. It's already they exist right now. Not everyone has access to it. The future's already here. It just hasn't been equally distributed yet, right? So, look, that's everywhere.
Yeah, I asked ChatGPT some important questions the other day, and it told me how much oat milk to put in my coffee. It was just incredible. The questions that I waste the time with over there on that GPU. It's
That's
so
a good
incredible.
point. The energy level it's crazy to think about the inefficiency of synthetic life still. So I think that's a bigger thing than people realize, that we need to get. Because the human brain is so efficient. It uses, all day, the amount of thoughts that we're able to have, it uses like the energy of a small like light bulb, like a 50-watt or 60-watt light bulb, running all day long. And one of those cat pictures on ChatGPT takes like more energy than your house uses in a day, right? Or your whole family uses in a day. It's like it can be 500 times what's the normal amount. So we need to get to a point where AI is as efficient as biology, and that's for a lot of reasons. But it could be also that artificial intelligence isn't quantum computers. Like, that's different. Substrate independence. Intelligence is a way of thinking. So arguably your university education is not a natural way of thinking. That's an artificial intelligence that was installed on you in education. And it was created because of books. Like, the books were created for the purpose of creating this artificial intelligence. So at a certain point, we are learning about, kids are learning right now. Kids are growing up on their phones. These Zoomer kids, or the alpha kids, they're probably going to be somewhat artificial intelligence naturally. I think that's something to expect. Also, we're talking about neural link, and it's not going to matter because AI will be telepathic. It's already radio, and kids are going to pick up on it naturally, and they're going to learn to think in those ways. But yeah, I think quantum computers are also going to become far more common in a year, especially because of like the military industrial complex. It seems like we're rushing into quantum computers.
Yeah, I think so too. I hope I'm not cutting you off, Julia, because you look like you're about to say something.
Oh no, that was brilliant. I love what he just said. That is like such a hot mic moment of like, hello, artificial intelligence is some of this garbage we've been fed of some of these narratives and information. And so it was so brilliant. That's why I love Andreas.
That was absolutely brilliant. And when you look at quantum computing, what fascinates me about it is that it sort of can be compared to, and I've looked at it like this, to the secret life of trees. If you look at it like with those absolutes, with our current computing, with these ones and zeros, and you look at it like a scroll, it's kind of like we've rolled out a scroll, like the Torah or one of these documents. But when we roll it up into a circle, then we take those ones and zeros, instead of being linear, we can put a 1 on the top and the 0 on the bottom. Then we have this nexus to null space, this infinite aspect in the middle. Put a 1 over here and a 0 over here. We have this nexus to null space at every directions. And it's incredible when you look at nature again, that there is this aspect with the secret life of trees. Especially when we look at how quantum computing works with that, you want to look at with qubits and at how fast things move. Think about a tree. Why don't the leaves burn? When it's in the sun, you got this photonic exchange of energy that moves with a transbiotic accumulation. It moves down through it with, calcium starches or whatnot, and moves down through the tree and then gets distributed out for miles around, and all the near flora and fauna gets to benefit from this exchange of energy. And it's so incredible when we think about this, that we're using the universe as our computer, that it's like we could go back at that point and have access to everything that's ever happened. And we could go back into little Julius Caesar on his 8-year-old name day and know what he was thinking that morning, what he had for breakfast. And I think as we're entering that area with our technology, and like you were talking about, like looking at like a telepathy or whatnot, working like a radio signal. I really truly believe we're going to move beyond Neuralink. Neuralink is Model T4 technology right now, and we'll eventually just move to taking something and putting it up our nose. Not like Charlie Sheen, he's winning and has tiger blood, by the way, but we will put up our nose an augmented receiver and optical display. So we're using, whether you look at your EEGs or biorhythms, however you want to look at your brain, you're using that like your IP address on a quantum computer network, and then you'd be just in the movie theater watching a whatever latest piece of cinematic garbage that we put out these days, and you're able to answer a phone call or listen to music, just like that song you were listening to before the show. What was that called?
Oh, I forget. Song 20 years ago or something like that. I forget. I'll have to find it again.
Everyone should check that out.
I have it somewhere.
Yeah, while you're looking that up,
song?
Sorry, Julia.
It's called "Do You Remember This Song?"
A song about a song.
Yeah. I'm sorry, Julia.
Oh, I was just gonna say, was there anything you wanted to add that we didn't get to cover, Andreas? I know you don't really talk about yourself, so this is like, I feel like you don't really, you don't really do this. But
I don't know what to bring up. I mean, like, you want to talk about NASA. I could talk about the Janus Project or something, but or like the
Janus Project, or like wasn't your grandfather and father in Lockheed?
My grandfather did work for Lockheed. Yeah, he was involved.
Does Janus, okay, just before you go forward, when you say Janus Project, I've never heard of it before, but it reminds me of Janus as in January, or Janitor, the keeper of the keys, the face that looks backwards and forwards.
Face, yeah.
So is this like time? Is this like time viewing technology, or?
I wish. No, so Janus was supposed to be looking at different parts of nature. So it was like, they're like, we know more about space than we know about the Earth. And I'm like, wow, that's the way they introduced it. They're like, we really don't know that much about the corners of the Earth or what's underwater, or like what the ice is really like. And so, if we could study the Earth a lot more, then we could understand more about space. I think that was really interesting to me, because as you start to realize, like, they have no idea about anything, certainly nothing about space, at least the research that they do have about the world, I mean, they have access to actually the truth about so many things, but you'll never hear about them. And yeah, I mean, I don't know, there's a lot to those stories, basically. But looking into what kind of microorganisms lived in Bolivia, like at the salt flats, that was something interesting to me, is like extremophiles. Wow. Because up to that point, I didn't understand exactly how, sociology works, but even just like bacteria, if you were to live in, if you go to the 7,000 degree sulfur geysers, you're thinking like nothing lives there, right? Like, this has got to be completely empty. But that has 15,000 times more life than your average swamp water. And you think swamp water, that's got to be where all the life is. But because it has to compete with everything else, most of the things kill everything down, and there's only a few things left, right? Which are all uniform because they're the things that can survive.
Yes.
But if those things were in sulfuric 7,000 degree water, like geyser steam, they would be kicked out. They would die. So because those things can't live there, all of these other things can thrive. And so in the most extreme of conditions, we see more life, not less life, and more diversity, not less diversity.
I agree with you. And looking into nature, I mean, that's looking again back at that biomimicry stuff. We get into Victor Schauberger and everything. But when we look into nanobacteria and even going down to the most infinitesimally small levels of the universe, I think we're going to see intelligent life when we go down to the micro. We're going to see all sorts of things that we just haven't even scraped the surface, or at least the public hasn't been privy to yet.
Absolutely. Consciousness, and even maybe the idea that consciousness is collective generally.
Precursors, yeah.
Yeah, like thoughts are transient. We talked about like non-local thought fields, right? So we're maybe transceivers of thought, and so consciousness might be something even at below like a subatomic level, which is
right.
Crazy,
you know who's explored that is I know Hameroff and Penrose have explored that with Orc-Or, and they've definitely looked at that with the brain, and we look over at the microtubules being like so well designed as computational devices and being held together. Again, when we go back into what we were talking about before, superpositioning, quantum cohesion, definitely down at those levels, we'd look at consciousness precursors. I like the way you put that, fields of consciousness, though.
Right. Like thought fields, right? Fields of consciousness. And I feel like also the way we experience reality, like that might be something that is subjective, but might be based on an objective, true reality, right? This might be why CRISPR exists. So like DNA itself kind of proves that there's something that's non-material or something that's hypermaterial that is creating thought, like because there's an intelligence in design that something's looking for error correction before it even forms, right? So the entire material experiment is coming out of something that is perfectly ordered, whatever that is. That might be like the destiny, like the omega point again, that something is outside of time, something that's reached its conclusion, but it begins that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And welcome back, Julia. And also we see over here, Crypto Alchemist says consciousness exists in plasma. The collective consciousness definitely is in plasma.
Plasma is Julo conscious, yeah.
Absolutely. We look at protons, electrons, neutrons being put together a certain way in a configuration. The universe is no doubt intelligent and always communicating to us in whether you want to look at numbers, patterns. It's like an intelligent symphony. Julia, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but you do an incredible Mark Wahlberg. How would Mark Wahlberg talk about synchronicities in the universe communicating to us in signs?
He'd be like, oh gosh, some people, they'll just look at the clock and they'll see 1:11 and they'll be like, oh my God, that's confirmation of what I'm trying to do. Say hello to your mother for me, all right? Was that good? That wasn't really good.
That was
totally
dead
caught
on.
off guard. I need to.
Dead on balls, accurate.
It was totally accurate. You hit it. That's exactly what you'd say, and that's exactly how you would say it too. I definitely think it's incredible that we are conscious, constantly interacting with reality in that way, and the way it shows up. There's no doubt these patterns, bringing it back to that peristasis again. And it's all causality. We live in a universe with laws. It's like Einstein, when he was asked if he believed in God, he essentially said he believed in Spinoza's God. Spinoza, the Jewish philosopher, he didn't believe in a God that was going to smite the Philistines for thee necessarily, but he believed in one of law and order. If you want to look at that unified field or the source, whatever name you want to use. We're like, yeah, more Mark Wahlberg.
I did like Mark Wahlberg. That was good.
That was a damn good Mark Wahlberg.
Yeah.
I could do better. I need to just when I talk about DNA, I need to say it. I need to answer it like that. Andreas does a great Gilbert Godfrey.
Let's hear.
What?
Oh my
No, I
God, you
don't.
got to do Gilbert Godfrey.
I don't think I do. Do I?
Do you? Do you
I
actually?
don't remember doing that.
I was saying how when people say we were on a show one time and I was like, yeah, when people say I'm holding space, that
Oh
it
my
makes me
God.
want to like lose it and start talking like Gilbert Godfrey. Like, wait, what? What did you just say?
He's my spirit animal.
And then
He's
Andrea
great.
said, space between my ears. Space between your ears. But he nailed it. He did such a good Gilbert Godfrey.
I love that. Gilbert Godfrey wasn't he also the parrot on Disney's
Yeah,
Aladdin?
Iago. He's the Iago. Yeah.
Yeah, no, he was brilliant. He was also the principal or something on the Problem Child movies in the 80s. But that is just another piece of cinematic classics. But before we wrap up today, I wanted to ask you guys then, with all this technology that we've come across now, do you suppose that was the end of, like, let's say the ancient Egyptians talked about Zep Tepi. We talk about Atlantis and these prehistoric civilizations. Do you suppose that this led to their corruption? And it said very clearly, we see that in Plato's Timaeus and Critias and these ancient admonishments that they became corrupted by some kind of power, for lack of better terms. Maybe it was this aspect of Fohat that the Theosophists talk about, this serpentine or energetic aspect of supreme intelligence and technology. Was it their downfall? And could it be our downfall if we don't learn to get over our tribalism and use it effectively?
From what I understand, when we go to like technological, like, and we stop plugging into the organic, like, consciousness, the organic field, that we destroy ourselves. If you get too like power hungry and too like plugged into the mechanical versions of these things, and that's what I feel. But
Steve, are you saying like getting rid of our like physiology, and just what if we got rid of it altogether and found a way to interact, just on this non-locality switch like you're referring to earlier? Would it interrupt our evolution?
Andreas?
Yeah, Andreas, this is a curveball over to you.
I feel like the world evolutionarily, we hit some points where too much mutation happens too quickly, and so everything gets destroyed. And so there's a gradual process that could take a lot longer to happen, but we've scaled it to happen so much faster. It's telescopically faster evolution than ever before. It used to take, many generations that now can take only a dozen generations, or maybe can happen in a lifetime, right? Things that used to take 1,000 years can happen in a lifetime right now. So I think there was a time when, especially if we're talking about something that is aware or outside of time, right? That there's something that is, you can see the difference between the Victorian style, high decadence of a lived-in Tartary, and also this sort of like progenitor style that you talk about, like the Egyptian thing, or these non-tombs that are just industrial buildings. There's something that looks they're very different, because one is the pinnacle. Like, I think the Tartarian, Elizabethan looking stuff that everyone thinks about is the pinnacle of human aesthetic. The World's Fair aesthetic is this kind of ornate, beautiful, kitsch looking thing. But the progenitor art style is the opposite, like the pyramids and this sort of refined to the point of not thinking it can go anywhere belief in itself, that it's seen everything and it's gone everywhere and it's done everything. So like the oldest stuff that we see looks like that. It looks like something that doesn't think it can learn anything because it's already seen everything there is to see.
That thought too of like how these certain ancient civilizations knew where we were and what this place was and what the purpose. So like, even just take that thought of when before they died, that they were setting things up like ritualistically, because they were trying to control where their soul went next. and what to experience it, and even taking it to like what they wanted to incarnate in the next life. But like that knowledge of knowing where we're at, like what the play mode is, and it kind of adjusts where we're going and how you access that and what you do with it. But we've all kind of, we have amnesia. Like I feel like, and that's what we're here to do, like at this time too. And that's why it's so important to look back in history of like the real truth in history. And that's what is so important, significant about Andreas and what he speaks about in his knowledge is like he was saying with the artificial intelligence and these lies we were fed, and he's uncovered a lot of those and how important that is because of where we need to head. Like what it changes the trajectory and the intention.
Absolutely. I had a couple thoughts based on what you guys said, but I want to just comment on something that Stefan Kalin said in the channel here. He said, only posers talk about holding space. Well, that's not true. It depends on if they know light language.
Also, yoga. Stefan's name is Yoga Poser, so that's
So I mean that makes sense.
He's saying he does that.
Yeah, well, he's probably had to do some prana breathing before writing that. But Stefan, that was a great comment. I am reminded of a lot of things you talked about there. When we go back in ancient Egypt, for example, we find that the older and very ancient stuff, let's say before the pre-dynastics, we like this. There's an off-limits area that people talk about pre-cataclysmic. So all that stuff has no hieroglyphics on it whatsoever. Incredible granite craftsmanship. I mean, even the Great Pyramid was put together in a very particular way. And I mean, it's a polynomial tetrahedral structure that can be turned into a sphere using transdimensional mathematics. We look at this universe working in this aspects of this, for some have called it sacred geometry, but Plato said God geometrizes continually. But what's very interesting, bringing it back to Tartaria, bringing it back to what you both just talked about, is that Plotinus, one of the Neoplatonic thinkers, talked about in his essay on the beautiful, that the more beautiful your buildings were, the more incredible they were, that there was a sort of an effect that it had on consciousness. And you look at it today in these concrete jungles we live in, going back again to what you're saying about these unnatural environments we live in with all this frequency as opposed to nature, all the things we're bombarded with, these stone cold square buildings and skyscrapers and stuff. It's a lot different. There's one other thing I want to bring up, and Julia triggered this when she was talking. When we look over, like even people that study semiotics and all that, look at this. You look at, there's a great book people can check out there on how technology has changed us. And it's by Kittler. It's called Optical Media. And Kittler talks about the fact of that, look at how we changed with the invention of the mirror, or the invention of the alphabet, or the telephone, or the camera. Before that, people couldn't even see the back of their heads. And all this stuff changes. Look at Facebook. When you're liking someone's post, it's a convergence of identities, all of it leading up piece by piece by piece, ultimately changing us, which is why I think there's a slow dissemination of these things, so we don't get them all at once.
Absolutely. I mean, so you can see how the internet originally went through phone lines, so everything was recorded, right? Like everything, all data had to be recorded. And then at a certain point, more and more places are opened up to the internet, but they're fully studied so that they know what everyone's thinking. And it's, at one point, everyone on the internet spoke the same way and had the same kind of connections. We talked at some point about Excite when I did the Epstein Echo, the dolphin videos, because Excite Chat was this amazing system where people's faces came into chat rooms, and it was in the 90s, late 80s, early 90s. I mean, existed technically for the Next Machine in 89, but it was something that made it available really like 1992, 1993, 1993, 1997, that kind of period when early Power Mac, Power Book, Macintosh computer people were using this. But it was created by Epstein's girlfriend's sister, right? Glenn Maxwell's sister. So all of these people that are connected in terms of intelligence operations and In-Q-Tel, Peter Andreas Thiel to create Facebook, right? And News Corp. out of their connection from Kazaa and whatever the LimeWire like file studying systems that came out of MySpace, right? MySpace was originally supposed to be spyware in LimeWire, but then they realized it was more convenient as a social media app. And so many of these companies like aren't just studying you, they're programming you. Like that's the biggest thing about social media is it changes the way you look at yourself, not just the way you look at others, but way commodifying yourself. And this whole generation has commodified itself in a way that wouldn't have been acceptable since like the prostitutes of ancient Rome, right? And how weird it is. Like, yeah, how many followers, like what followers? Like, are you a Roman deity? Like, what is this? Like followers, right? Like, are we Stoics? I wish, but
there was like a tie with. Do you remember what that was, Andreas? Of like a tie to Ghislaine Maxwell tied to the children's curriculum like books that are made.
Oh, I'm sure, like McGraw Hill, because like they were invested in Texas. I don't know exactly that one, but I know she's put tons of money into that. That's the whole point, right? Is like, clone yourself, put your seed into every single sperm bank, buy boats and like harvest diamonds in the coasts. What's that recently? Like Terra Mars came up again because there's groups that are looking for like crystals, like in the submarine crystals, and they're harvesting all these submarine crystals.
Yeah, she had a submarine license.
Yeah, well, I mean, you didn't really need the license because like once you're out at sea, you can do whatever you want. So Terra Mars is like a naval corporation. Yeah,
that's crazy, and that's why it's amazing with 23andMe, and we've gone far beyond CRISPR. There's no doubt about it. And again, there's even been AI experiments that have gone wrong doing that sort of thing. But I think the real privilege in the future people are going to have, and this artificial type of baby making is definitely in the near future where you'll need the equivalent of a QR code and a social credit score to have a child. I think mass infertility and sterility is already on the way. However, I think the real privilege will be able to have a child out of your own DNA that they will look at, and I think that it already exists.
Well, that whole like soul technology of like what the mother's thinking about when they conceive is significant, and the type of souls that come through, and perhaps some people say don't come through when they're artificially made, or but like that soul technology right there is just fascinating.
It's amazing, and I think that all of our ancient civilizations and groups have thought about these things. They have looked at them, postulated them. When you look at what the Egyptians thought, we had a Ba, a Ka, and an Ak, or you had like a mind, body, soul, all these sort of things. The soul has been often thought as being this, whether you call it electromagnetic field, a sum total of our embodiments. And the Rosicrucians, they called it the golden wedding garment, or whatever you want to call it. It seems to be a vehicle to operate within the laws of our universe that contains this somehow very, very interesting spark inside of us that brings this uniqueness. It's been a fascinating conversation with you both. And
thank you, Andreas. Thank you.
Thank you for joining.
Yeah, hopefully we can do this again soon. I appreciate this chance to talk. It's good to meet you.
Yeah, this has been a lot of fun, and it's not too often I find someone that Julia introduced me to your work a while ago here, but it's not so often you find someone that not only is brilliant in all these subjects, but loves maple syrup and 1980s Canadian television.
Oh, it's the best show. Go on, Degrassi. So good.
My God.
Peanut Butter Experiment, obviously, is an amazing movie. The peanut butter and the hair and
so it's
the paintbrushes.
It's incredible.
Well, thanks everyone for being here, and thanks again, Andreas. And please go follow Andreas. He is amazing. His channel is Xirtus, Xirtus. Try to keep up because there's so much information he throws at you that some people are just like, I can't follow him. You have to slow it down and re-listen to it, and I still won't get everything. But you will fall in love with Andreas, and he's totally worth it.
I'm going to go check out all of Johnny's work as well. Good to meet you, Johnny.
You guys are awesome. I love both your work. I'm a huge fan of you both, and Andreas, definitely, man, you blew my mind, and we look forward to you coming back for sure. We got a lot more to get into. I hope everybody has an amazing night, and come back for more.
All
Thank
right.
you very
Take
much.
care.